Hey, yes. Hello, and welcome everyone to what's the epicenter of politics in America right now, Atlanta, Georgia. This is a news conference about how Black voters have been unfairly treated, purged from the voting rolls. Joining us are a wealth of reporters from across the state, but also the man who's heading this is Greg Palast. Greg, introduce everybody.
Okay. All right. My name is Greg Palast, and I'm head of the Palast Investigative Fund. I've been investigating, though, as a journalist on and off in Georgia, vote suppression tactics for 7 years for Rolling Stone, for BBC Television, Al Jazeera, and others. Today I'm working with heading a team from the Palast Investigative Fund that investigated the mass removal of voters from the voter rolls. We've been doing this for 3 years. Now I'd like to let you know who's on this call today. We are filing a lawsuit against the state. I'll explain it in a minute, but first I just want to mention the cast today is, well, you just saw Rosario Dawson behind that mask. We are issuing this PSA today in English, of course, but also Zoe Saldana Saldana is done a PSA for us in Spanish, which we are also releasing today on top of the lawsuit. Now, today we have with us the plaintiffs on the suit. First is LaTosha Brown, co-founder of Black Voters Matter. And by the way, she was a fellow at Harvard, just finished that stint, I believe. Barbara Arnwine, who is founder of the Transformative Justice Coalition. She's also a professor of law at Columbia University Law School on leave. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. And we also have with us C.K. Hoffler. C.K. Hoffler is the national chairman of the Rainbow Push Coalition. And she'll be speaking here for Rainbow Push and her client, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who's a little under the weather, as you may well know, too much to join us today. We have, and she's also, by the way, the president, the new incoming president of the National Bar Association. Gerald Griggs, our local counsel for the plaintiffs, who will be speaking for us. And we have Jeannie Meyer, also counsel for the plaintiffs. She can answer your legal questions, as can Gerald or CK, or actually any of the lawyers. And we also have John Lenzer, who headed the technical staff reviewing the list of people purged by the state. Again, my name is Greg Palast. Look, I just want to give you the basic of what the suit is. Can you still see me? Because I've changed my screen.
Yes. Yes, we see you.
All right. Look, in September, the ACLU issued a report by the Palast Investigative Fund team. We had hired roughly 15 experts who were on this case altogether. The state of Georgia had removed the ACLU report is called Georgia Voter Roll Purge Errors. We had sent the ACLU sent this information to the state. We offered to sit down with the state and find out why their lists were so wrong. Here's what's happened. We went through their list of 1/3 voters who were removed from the voter rolls on grounds that they had moved. You know, if you don't live in Atlanta, you can't vote in Atlanta. But we were finding, and this began when I was in 2018 during the Abrams-Kemp race. We were at the polls and found voter after voter saying, I couldn't vote because I was purged, including, for example, Christine Jordan. She was 92 years old. I was there. You just saw her granddaughter in the film and a little bit of her. 92 years old. She was been voting at the same polling station for 50 years. And now she was told that she couldn't vote there. We looked it up. She was one of the people purged because she had moved. I went to the house that she supposedly moved from, and there was a picture of her having dinner at that house with Martin Luther King, her cousin. So she's there 60 years. But her case is repeated now in a purge that happened in November 2019 of 198,000.
There's a meeting voters. Now on it. I'm going to.
Excuse me. Could you mute your buttons for a moment? So 198,000 voters were removed that we found on grounds that they had moved, but they hadn't. Now here's the deal, as our incoming president would say. These voters had not moved. They should not have been purged. In particular, tens of thousands of people on that list were purged because they were purged, because they had supposedly put in change of address forms with the post office, but not according to the post office. The post office told our experts, and you can ask John Lenzer, through their contractor Merkel Corporation, their licensee, that these people had not put in change of address forms in these past 4 years. They got it wrong. How did the state of Georgia get this so disastrously wrong? The answer is they used the wrong list. How'd they get the wrong list? They hired a little one-man outfit out of Nebraska to provide the list, the Postal Service change of address list. They did not, this is not a licensed vendor of the post office. And according to the National Voter Registration Act, according to federal law and common sense, you get the official licensed list from the post office. You can only remove voters if you use the list obtained from the licensee. And the licensee said, these people have not moved. We have other evidence that these voters have not moved. And so the plaintiffs are now asking and demanding, after asking several times to the Secretary of State, now they are demanding that these 198,000 voters be returned to the voter rolls. They are removed in violation of the National Voter Registration Act. So now I'm going to turn it over, if I may, to LaTosha Brown, founder of Black Voters Matter. Then we'll go to Barbara Arnwine, and then CK Hoffler.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Greg. Thank you for your work on leading the investigative team to really be able to uncover this information. And I will say, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think it's so just a couple of, I'll just say, I'll be very brief. I think that we need to recognize that right now, where we have seen the headlines of these bogus claims of voter fraud, what has happened in the state of Georgia is not voter fraud, it has been a voter suppression. And so while there's been a lot of emphasis given on this bogus claim that Trump has made around what's happening in Georgia, where there's been no evidence, we have a preponderance of evidence of 200,000 people who have been dropped from the voting rolls. And we literally are not seeing, I think, even the same kind of traction around people being really upset and disturbed by this. That, and in fact, that when we're talking about the Secretary of State, who is what we know is actually violating the Voting Rights Act, right now, currently as we speak, in a state that is one of the reasons why we had the need for the act in the first place. And so I think that we have to really recognize that in this moment, in this critical election, what we saw in Georgia has not been, we have not seen and been able to really be able to see massive scale voter fraud. But we certainly have been able to see massive scale voter suppression. And I think that in this lawsuit, part of the reason why we are moving forward on pushing this lawsuit is because that what we're talking about is in this next election, as we're going, not just on this election, every election, those folks should not be denied their right, their constitutional right to participate in this election, right? And so we think that is really critical that this story is lifted up. There is a story around voting that should be lifted up, but that story certainly should be ground zero in Georgia for voter suppression. So between now and then, what we've done is in this last election, once we discovered the information, we wanted to make sure that we tried to reach out ourselves to some of the voters, that 100,000 of those voters, we actually sent out cards to let them know that their rights had been infringed upon, that they were dropped from the voting rolls and that they needed to register to vote. And so while we did that, because that's part of our work of wanting people to engage in the process, quite frankly, that should not be our job. We pay taxes to a government, and we have a Secretary of State. That is his job. He has one job, right? And that is his job. And so I think it's really important that we also don't shift the burden. Now that having to be able to defend democracy becomes the burden of and having free and fair access to for the election should not just be a burden on nonprofit organizations. That is what we request, what we demand of our government. And so what we are calling for is an immediate restoration of those 198,000 voters who were wrongly taken from the voting rolls. And I'm hoping that this lawsuit not only will have the restoration of that, but will also point to a larger issue that is not rooted in voter fraud, but in fact, that the biggest threat to democracy in this country right now is voter suppression.
Well, thank you so much, LaTosha, and we'll take questions after, starting with the AP if they're in. Right now, the founder of the Transformative Justice Coalition, and you may have also known her previously as director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, Professor Barbara Arnwine. Barbara, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you so much, Greg. And thank you, LaTosha, and all the other plaintiffs in this case and all the other justice voting rights fighters who are in this great state of Georgia for all of your amazing work that you do every day. This lawsuit is absolutely critical. And I am glad to be joined by the chair of the board of the Transformative Justice Coalition, Daryl D. Jones, Esquire. He is on this call also. And I hope if he has a word, Greg, that he'll be able to just add. But I just want to say, we filed this suit because there is nothing more reprehensible than the failure of a state to provide to its voters the full right to vote. Nothing more reprehensible than when a state operates in a sloppy manner or purposefully sets out to block voters. And voters have the right. The one thing our Constitution gives to citizens universally is the right to vote. That right can only be denied on certain very specified constitutional grounds. Yet we are in the 9th year of massive voter suppression in this country. And Georgia has been not only ground zero, it has been a national disgrace by failing to uphold the rights of voters to have access to the ballot box. Nothing's uglier than the purging of voters, because you're purging people who went out and registered to vote. They stated to the world that they wanted to participate in our democracy, that they wanted the right to cast a vote. That's why they registered. And then you remove them for unlawful, wrongful reasons, outrageous. The state has been on notice for months now about this failure. For months, they've been notified through this report that Greg issued this fall. They have known that these voters, almost 200,000 voters, are wrongfully purged. They've done nothing. That is unacceptable. You know, around the country, people get confused. They say, well, we saw, this whole fight going on where, people were fighting about counting the votes. And it seems like that Secretary of State is a good man because he upheld the right to have every vote counted. But there's something that people need to understand. There's a difference between blocking access to the ballot box, to who gets to actually cast the vote, versus the issue of, do you count those votes once cast? That's where the distinction is. There are people who are against both. They want to block every voter from voting, and they want to block those ballots from being counted. There are two issues here, but on this one today, we're talking about the access to the ballot box, because they can have a a vote counted if they're not able to vote. So we're saying to the courts, please immediately restore these voters. Give them the right to which they have sought access. Have them restored. Make sure the law is enforced. Tell Georgia yet again, Georgia, to abide by the law. And for that reason, we are so proud to join in this lawsuit, so determined to see justice rendered for every voter. And we will not stop until every voter is able to vote free of any impediment whatsoever, Greg. And I know that Daryl probably has one quick word to add to what I've said.
Okay, we'll make it, can you hear me? We'll make it one. Thank you so much, Professor Arnwine. If you have legal questions or you get in an accident, don't call her. That's not the case. She does. Now, just very quickly from Daryl Jones, but quickly, because then we want to hear a few words from C.K. Hoffler, and then we'll take questions. We have quite a legal team, technical team, et cetera here. So, Daryl, if you have just a quick word, because we want to let people ask the questions, the press. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and I appreciate all that that you've done personally and working on this type of issue, not simply for the Rainbow Push and Transformative Justice and all the individual organizations, but for every American who believes in democracy and in voting. We appreciate what you have done in that capacity.
Thank you.
One of the things I wanted to lift up, in addition to what Barbara has said, is that what we do know at a minimum as a result of your investigation is that what should have gone through and what has been put in place that would be consistent with the Voting Act would have been for anyone, any entity, any corporation that Georgia wanted to use to try to purge any voters, to try to catch any voters, to find out where they live, that they had to use a licensee from the U.S. Postal Service.
Yes.
So just the most basic principle that's been required has not been adhered to. And it's interesting that this comes about in the middle of an election. We've got to understand this. Had the Voting Rights Act of 1965 not been screwed up, not been tampered with, we wouldn't be in the position where we are right now, because that would have required pre-clearance, and it wouldn't have been pre-cleared based on what they're doing right now. So we appreciate what you're doing, Greg, not only for the organizations that are involved as plaintiffs, but for each American who believes in the fairness of the process. You know, it was Jesse Jackson who said, what we request is a level playing field, rules that are transparent, and officiating that's fair. We can live with the results so long as those factors are in place. That's what this is about. So thank you very much, Greg, and thank you for pushing everyone forward.
Thank you so much, Daryl. Now, C.K. Hoffler, who is here as chairwoman of Rainbow Push Coalition, and she is also, I would just mention, the new head of the National Bar Association. Ms. Hoffler, can you unmute yourself?
Isn't it amazing? We do hundreds of Zoom calls, and each time I know I forget to unmute myself. Well, anyway, good morning, everyone. Greg, I want to thank you for all the extraordinary work that you do. You know, speaking after the incomparable Barbara Arnwine, Daryl Jones, LaTosha Brown, I just want to recognize the extraordinary work that they do. And I also want to recognize the phenomenal legal talent that we have in Gerald Griggs, who is a lead counsel in this case, as well as Jeannie Myron, because, you know, but for that extraordinary legal talent, putting this together and fighting the fight in court, which is something that we as trial lawyers can do, we wouldn't be in this space. So I want to recognize you all and thank you for your extraordinary work. Yes, I am here today representing Rainbow Push Coalition as their chair, and the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who I've represented for 32 of my 33 years as a lawyer. and as well as the organizations. But now I'm speaking as chair of the board, and I want to recognize Robert Patillo, who is our Southwest Regional Director, who's an extraordinary lawyer as well, who's on the call, who helped to shape and frame the issues for Rainbow Push, as we are the spokesperson today. And Jackson, who apologizes for not being here. He had a conflict in his schedule for an appointment, so he really couldn't do it, but wanted to be here. And we know the message that he is conveying. He's always saying, keep hope alive. No matter how dark the days are, purging of voters is the equivalent of stealing from someone, taking, violating, oppressing. That is what the purging of votes, someone's right to vote. And I will never forget, on March 2nd of 2020, I sat in the great late Congressman John Lewis's office with Reverend Jesse Jackson. The two of them, these great civil rights icons. And I asked for their advice and guidance on what my agenda should be as president of the National Bar Association. And this is what they said. They said, CK, we fought, many of us died, we were beaten so that there would be a right to vote, so that people would have, Black and brown people would have the right to vote. And they said, so you, as heading the National Bar Association and the over 66,000 lawyers that you represent, your mandate is to protect the right to vote, protect people's ability to vote. And that's why this lawsuit is so important. Because people's ability, all people want to do is just vote without suppression. As LaTosha Brown said so eloquently, voter suppression, that is a plague. That is a pandemic. You talk about a pandemic. So when we talk about the election protection movement that the Barbara Arnwine created when she was at the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights, yes, Barbara Arnwine. So it's only fitting that Transformative Justice Coalition is a plaintiff in this case. It's only fitting that Rainbow Push is a plaintiff in this case. It's only fitting that these great lawyers are assembled. And by the way, and I shared this with Gerald Griggs this morning, the National Bar Association stands in solidarity of this lawsuit, and we're going to get National Bar Association lawyers involved in this litigation because we must leave no stones unturned. We have to show this country and the world that Georgia doesn't play. We don't play with people's right to vote. We're very serious about this. This is nonpartisan, people's right to vote. That's a nonpartisan issue. We should not be subjected to suppression. So again, I just wanted to say thank you to Greg, to all of the people assembled on this call. We have some giants in the civil rights movement in Georgia and in this country assembled, as well as the press. We want to thank you. And I'm going to leave you with an expression that I always like to say when I feel some kind of way about oppression, which is what purging voters is. And it's as follows. It's an old Portuguese expression. A luta continua. Vitória é certa. What does that mean? The struggle continues. A luta continua. But the second part is so critical for this litigation. Victoria, victory, Victoria, victory is certain. So we've got to Georgia and the world. We are going to continue this fight, and just know that the National Bar Association stands in solidarity with this effort as well, because I have all these hats that I'm wearing, but today I'm speaking on behalf of the incomparable Reverend Jesse Louis Jackson Sr.
Oh, thank you, CK. And and now you can direct your questions. Any member of the press that wants to speak, there is a little button that says under where it says participants that you can raise your hand or physically raise your hand, and Carrie Harrison will unmute you and bring you in to ask any questions. And by the way, while you're deciding what your questions are, please, let me say something. We've been reading in the paper that there's violence directed at the Secretary of State's staff. This is horrendous. There's, instead of baseless rumors backed by violence, we're doing something very different, which is to take facts into a courtroom. The violence is deplorable right now, and this has got to stop. So our concern is expressed to the Secretary of State, but also we must be concerned about the voters. Any questions?
I have a quick question, Greg. Hi, this is Jessel from The Real News.
Yes.
A question for any of the panelists. We've seen courts reject Trump's claims of voter fraud across the country, his false claims of voter fraud. Does this give you any hope of courts acting to address your complaints? And if you can talk specifically more about the relevance for the runoff elections, which are in a little over a month.
Do we have one of the attorneys who can answer? Jeannie, Greg, Gerald Griggs, Jeannie Meyer, CK, Barbara.
Sure.
Someone want to field? We have so many lawyers that we got to field them. Gerald Griggs.
First and foremost, I want to thank all of the social justice and civil rights legends and icons that are on the call, both old and new. And it's a pleasure and an honor for me to represent the plaintiffs in this action here in my home state of Georgia. To answer shortly the question, I think that this lawsuit will be successful because it's grounded in facts and in the law. There's clearly a violation of the National Voting Rights Act here that we see clearly. And as far as the upcoming Senate race, we believe that the evidence that Greg has presented, that 200,000 citizens from Georgia have been illegally removed from the rolls, and I think that will have a impact on the Senate race if we are successful in this lawsuit. So I think based on the decisions that have been made around the country in both federal courts and states courts against President Trump's basically trumped up charges of voter fraud, I think that we'll be successful with actual evidence and facts and data to back up the voter suppression. Voter suppression is very real. It's been going on ever since we had the Holder decision. And so we have to make sure, Shelby Holder, we have to make sure that we protect this most fundamental right in the birthplace of civil rights. You know, Representative Lewis was one of my icons, and he said the most powerful weapon, nonviolent weapon we have is the ballot, is the vote. And so it's important for us to protect that as the next generation. And so that's why it's important that we stand in the shadow of Thurgood. We stand in the shadow of Donald Lee Hollowell, and we make sure we push forward our civil rights, and there could be no regression. So the short answer is we feel like based on the mood of the country and the mood of the judiciary, we will be successful to be able to prove this case in a court of law, which is where you take issues that you have grievances with your government. You provide facts and evidence in court, and that's what we're going to do in this case.
Let me just add one small thing. This is a small thing, which is that the Secretary of State, when the Fair Fight case, plaintiffs were trying to prevent many of these same people from being actually purged in late 2019. The court refused to do it. But one thing that the Secretary of State said, well, if we make a mistake, it's really easy to put people back on. It only takes 24 to 48 hours to put them back on. So we're going to hold them to it.
And I have a question. This is Shelley Winter from WSB. I have two questions, actually. It seems like both the left, political left, and the political right are both feeling like votes are being stolen, elections are being stolen. Regardless of whether there's evidence, no evidence, because both sides will say neither one has evidence. My question to you all is it appropriate that now we can come together devoid of partisan Democrat, Republican, left versus right, and understand that possibly, since everyone feels like they're being cheated, that possibly we can all come together and say our elections across the board need to be relooked at, the way we conduct them, the machines we used. I mean, 2006, Cynthia McKinney said the machines were a problem. Documentaries have been made about these machines over the last 15 or 20 years. The right has ignored it. Now the right is saying the machines are bad. So do you guys think that you guys could work together with those on the right who believe the elections are unfair, regardless of the evidence or lack thereof, that we need new evidence, we need new things for evidence? That's the first question. The second question is, I had Greg on my show 3 years ago after the 2018 election, and he had all the same evidence. Why are you guys just filing this lawsuit right before a very important runoff election where early voting starts 10 days from now?
Okay,
Well, Shelley.
Okay, just one quick thing. Just let me know, because someone's asked for a basis of the suit. And I should say, number one, we're not talking about these claims of fraud where no one can show you the claims. We have 198,000 names and addresses, which we have now attached to this suit via link, because it's a lot of names. So we've got the names, we've got the addresses, we've got the experts. John Lenzer is here. I didn't come up with this list. John Lenzer is an expert at what's called address list hygiene. It's a substantial report that was issued by the ACLU. What we had to do is wait 90 days under federal law after informing the Secretary of State that they got it wrong. None of us expected this runoff. So it's a legal requirement that we had to give them 90 days. This is like the 91st day. That's when we can file a lawsuit. Is there any other lawyer that needs to weigh in as to, the other questions? I can't answer them, their policy.
I just like to weigh in very quickly to Shelley's question. I mean, this is the travesty and this is the consequence of the Shelby County versus Holder case, which dismantled in large part an important part of the Voting Rights Act. And that's why we're having this misapplication or sort of difficult or unacceptable application of some of the rules that are confusing or problematic for voters, and we're seeing it manifest itself in Georgia. So to your question, shouldn't people come together and work together? Well, the election protection effort is nonpartisan. The whole goal, the whole concept behind that is to simply protect the right to vote. Protect the right, it doesn't matter who's voting, protect the right to vote. So everybody should have the ability to go to the polls and vote absent voter suppression. That is nonpartisan. That doesn't require you being a member of the Democrat or Republican Party. So in many respects, Shelley, it would be better if both sides could work together. We got to get through this election, number one. And number two, this underscores the significance of why this election is important, because there needs to be a Voting Rights Act in this United States of America that prevents this kind of nonsense. That's
okay. One quick thing. Let me note. This is Greg Palast again, because I keep getting a request to simplify the case into a sentence. So I'll keep it. May I make it without offending the attorneys? Here's the deal. The Secretary of State removed 1/3 voters for moving their residents out of their county. 198,000 of them, and we have the names and addresses of each, did not move. How could the state make this error? The state was required to use a United States Postal Service licensee to get the list of people who've changed their address. They did not. They got the wrong list. They used a list which is not only wrong, but a list which is illegal, because you must use a U.S. Postal Service licensee, ours is Merkel Corporation, the biggest, to determine if people have, in fact, put in change of address forms to the Postal Service. It's real simple. Wrong list, wrong names, and that's the core of it. And beyond that, there are other names on the list which we have used 240 data feeds to determine people's addresses. That's why I didn't do this analysis. I'm just running the Palast Investigative Fund. The actual technical analysis, I actually literally had nothing to do with that. Was John Lenzer leading a team of experts. We did not tell them what to come up with. They came up with the answers. They are nonpartisan, as am I. That's the case.
Did those people vote? Did those people ever vote?
They were removed. A lot of them were voting 50 years.
But I'm saying, did they ever vote? Were they given provisional ballots to cast a vote?
They were unregistered. You can't cast a provisional ballot if you're not registered.
Exactly.
I mean, there are a couple of points that I want to make to this, because as an activist, I really need to, and as a person who's dedicated my life in the South to this, that we create false equivalencies. This is not the same as a voter fraud. We're literally talking about straight up voter suppression. If it looks like a cat, if it sounds like a cat, it's a cat. The bottom line is that this very act is the quintessential definition of why those folks in my hometown of Selma, Alabama, fought for the right to vote. And so I think it's really important for us to be mindful around that. If this is not about left or right, my right to vote isn't a left issue. It's my right to vote. That fundamentally, if there had been a Republican, who are we to assume that of those 198,000, that all of those are going to vote Democrat, right? That at the end of the day, I'm quite sure in that 198,000, there are some people that are going to vote Republican. There are some people that are going to vote Democrat. That what we're talking about is we're talking about a basic fundamental right that has been infringed upon, that what led to the Voting Rights Act. And to your point, I agree around reaching out to the Republicans, for the Republicans and the Democrats, for both of them, for both parties. We have been pushing, those of us who also stand in spaces with nonpartisan have been pushing both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Quite frankly, I don't think either party has done enough. The Democratic Party has certainly done more than the Republican Party, particularly since there is a bill sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk right now that he's refused to do anything about it, because he's refusing to literally be able to deal with the Voting Rights Act and the issues related in that. So I think we've got to really move beyond the political punditry and say what this is. This is voter suppression that has been targeted disproportionately to Black folk in the state of Georgia as the demographics change, and to certain voters. And in that process, there are voters' rights, whether they're Republican, Democratic, Libertarian, that have been affected by this process.
LaTosha Brown, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah, specifically, I understand that the voter suppression issue very important, but there's a one particular practical thing that I want to ask relative to machines in neighborhoods of color. Why is it that every year we have that issue of not having enough machines, and during the rest of the year, not during an election, we don't do what is, and I'm not the legal person, but do what is necessary to ensure that, given what we know happens every year, that is actually mitigated. I understand voter suppression is responsible for about 3 to 5% in the outcome of an election. But people not voting because they're discouraged because of lines, inconvenience, etc., just may be more ahead. So we have a double whammy. Is there anything being done on the other side as well? What LaTosha is doing is excellent, but is there other people working on the other issues as well?
I want to be a little careful. Wait, I want to just be a little careful that we don't get too far afield, but if someone wants to take that quickly, I do want to make one note before we lose some of our, because we do want to cut out in 15 minutes maximum. And one point before if someone's ready to answer Egberto Willie's question, is that we know one thing that Raffin's Purge is going to do. He's going to go through the list of the 198,000. He says, this guy's died, that guy's gone to prison for homicide, whatever. We know that our list is not perfect. We also know that our findings are from the legal list, not the illegal one. And since our findings were made to match their investigation of 1 year ago, thousands of people on that list may have passed away or in fact moved. We have no evidence that anyone's from that list has ever committed voter fraud, put in a vote to which they're not entitled. We don't have zombies showing up at the polling stations. There is no harm to the court ordering, or hopefully Mr. Raffin's Purger simply restoring those voters, because if a few have moved, some died, whatever, there's no harm. But not returning those voters means, no question, tens of thousands will lose their right to vote in this runoff. We don't have the party registrations of people. We did not look. We don't want to know. This is nonpartisan. Does anyone want to answer Willie's question?
Greg, this is Attorney Patel, Southeast Regional Director for the Rainbow Push Coalition, and just kind of to discuss the last two questions. One, this is a nonpartisan issue. These are nonpartisan organizations. This is not meant to benefit any particular party or candidate. It's a particular question on leveling the playing field. In 2006, Thurber Baker won statewide in Georgia as an African-American Democrat with nearly 60% of the vote. There has not been another African-American elected statewide since that election. There's not been another Democrat elected statewide since that election. This all while the state is becoming demographically more diverse, younger, with 35% of the population being African-American, 11% Latino, 5% Asian, 52% of the state is women, with one of the largest LGBTQ centers in the country, and a massive influx of people from northern states with liberal values moving to Atlanta and the metro area in the last decade, but yet and still the state has become more politically polarized without one party having the ability to freely and fairly compete in those elections. We believe that this is directly attributable to efforts at voter suppression that we've seen for 2 decades in Georgia. It started with voter ID back 20 years ago, where the state wanted to charge $10 to individuals to vote before that was struck down as being a poll tax. This has manifested itself in the Diebold voting machines, which were previously in use in Georgia, which were shown to be exceedingly inaccurate, and at one point were 20 years old before being replaced by the Dominion machines this year. We believe that these efforts at voter suppression and voter purges constitute an unconstitutional barrier to vote, because you're forcing these individuals who are purged to take extra steps in order to simply exercise that same franchise that they were already innately able to participate in. So by doing so, you're making it more difficult for individuals to vote, which we believe is unconstitutional, and that's why these suits are important, to make sure we're leveling the playing field. If one group wants to limit the number of people who are voting, we believe that the effort should be put on the other side to make sure we are increasing the number of people voting, increasing the franchise, having a free, fair election where all Americans have the ability to speak up and have their voices heard.
Yes, and I want to also join in, because people make the mistake of always talking about both sidism, and I'm so glad that LaTosha spoke to that about the false equivalencies. But I want people to really understand, and Egbert, your question disturbed me in the sense that it's clear that people don't know all the work that we're doing, that there's a lack of knowledge. So I invite you and everybody else to go to votingrightsalliance.org, votingrightsalliance.org. Find out about how we're fighting to make sure that the polling places are fair, that there's equal machines, equal staffing, that there's the fight that we did, all the groups, the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda, and all of them did to just get drop boxes equally throughout the state. The fight that's going on right now to reach the millions of voters who don't even know there is a Senate runoff election happening, because the state is failing to reach out to them, knowing that there's no internet access in so many of these counties, and knowing that people need to be reached. And so we're doing that work. The work that we're doing in calling voters and finding out that they're receiving deceptive emails and practices that are trying to stop them from voting, telling them that they're not registered when they are, lying to them, telling them they're going to be watched when they vote, all that stuff that we do to educate and protect voters. I think people don't know that we're on the front lines every day doing this work. It's not just when there's a camera. It's not just when we're doing a press conference. We're doing this work every day with average people who need help, who desperately want to understand what their rights are. And I want to also say, there's a mistake too in this assumption in the last 2 questions I heard. One of the mistakes is thinking that there is no nonpartisan dialogue going on across all kinds of political alignments, because there are. We are working together. That $425 million that came to, quote, help with the voting machines from Congress, that was a bipartisan effort. It was done by groups from the far right, far left, and frankly, I don't think voting rights is political. I don't think it's left, right, center, or anything. I think it's American. That the American Constitution is what guarantees every citizen the right to vote, unless they committed a crime or some other constitutional, act of treason against the U.S. So I just think that you need to spend more time with us, learn more about what we're doing. Be clear that we are filing this lawsuit today because the voters have the right to vote. The state should not be impeding, blocking, making people go through jump hurdles, navigate through roadblocks. None of that should be true. And so we're fighting, as I have fought since 2011, against voter suppression. And it's not because we're making up something, it's because it's critical to having a democracy that our young people who turned out in droves this year, it was young people, frankly, who turned Georgia around. Let's be clear, they showed up in numbers, but they got to see a working democracy to stay in the game. And that's why we're fighting to make sure that this democracy is working for all Americans, regardless of party. Because I've sued as many Democrats as I've sued Republicans.
That's why I want to ask.
One quick thing, technically, because I don't know if she dropped off. Eileen Sullivan of the New York Times has asked to be allowed back in. If you are back in, Eileen, and you have your question, many apologies. I don't know if you got back in. Okay. Maynard, now we only have about 5 minutes left. Go right ahead, Maynard. Tell us.
Hi, this is Maynard Eaton with the SLC National. Is this litigation Georgia specific or does it resonate nationwide?
CDC has new guidelines on who should be first in line to receive the COVID-19.
Jeannie?
Somebody needs to kill that. There you go.
Jeannie, can you answer that?
Or
one of the other attorneys?
This could certainly have impact nationwide because in many ways what Georgia does is what Ohio does and a number of other states do use against infrequent voters and knocking them off the rolls without notice. And it is a way, it's a part of our case is a constitutional challenge to those kinds of programs against infrequent voters. And that's, I guess the Supreme Court in Houston in 2018 said these are okay according to the statute, but nobody addressed the constitutional issue. That issue is also, this has impact, could have impact nationally on that question.
Let me say two things. Number one, the Palace Investigative Fund has looked at Purge list in Wisconsin, and the Board of Elections there acted upon our recommendations that their purge list was no good, and they did not purge voters. We also looked at other states, several other states. But what makes Georgia unique, so this case has national implications. However, there's a very Georgia-specific, simple issue at the very top, which is Georgia used the wrong list, removed people based on a wrong list, removed people based on a list not provided by a licensed, legal, qualified post office licensee. There's only about 18 in America, and we have John Lenzer on, our expert, who can explain these things if someone needs it. And if anyone needs a copy of the suit, and it's even excluding exhibits, it's a good 50, 80 pages long at this point. I know it's long, but if you do want the suit, please contact us. We'll shoot it right out to you. It's filed today. Any other questions? We can take maybe one more question or a final comment.
Great. My name is Vernon Oakes. I'm a host of Everything Co-op on WOL radio station. My question is there any punitive damage to the state of Georgia? I put the value of my vote is at least $100,000 a year to me, the value of my vote. And it's probably higher than that if you look at the vote represents healthcare, housing, education, wealth creation, environment, and everything else, who we vote for. So is there any punitive damage, and should there be?
Currently, there's no, the ask in the case is to get people back on the voter rolls. The issue of other kind of relief is left to the court. We did not specifically ask for punitive damages.
And also just kind of piggyback off of that, let's understand that these are we have the emergency issue of right now of restoring these voters to the roll. So that's got to be the focus of what's happening in a state like Georgia, where as we saw, the presidential election was decided by 12,000 votes. If 10% of these people who are restored to vote end up voting, that's enough to shift an election in Georgia. So we have to ensure that we are working towards that goal of ensuring that we have a free, fair election, and we ensure the franchise to all individuals. And to the previous question, until we have a nationwide voting rights set, then we're going to have to attack these issues piecemeal state by state. But as you create that statewide precedence, the same way that voter suppression rolled across the southeastern United States and then through the Midwest, which fundamentally changed the nature of that Rust Belt vote, the same way that voter suppression rolled its way up north, we are hoping that our suits will roll their way across the nation and break down many of these barriers to voting.
And I just want to add, I noticed some people have asked for the URL again. It's votingrightsalliance.org. I also just want to say, Greg, I was delighted when Wisconsin reacted to the same kind of reporting data that you gave to them. And it just shows that states have choices, and this state of Georgia has made the wrong choice. It's chosen not to take the steps that it should take to restore voters. So they're forcing us to go to court to say to the courts, please do what the state should have done to restore these voters. They never should have taken them off in the first place. Do right by the voters and do what is necessary. But instead, they're trying to impose new obstacles. I mean, this press conference is about this lawsuit, but we could have done an entire press conference about the new voter suppression that's being proposed right now in Georgia, that's being instituted right now in Georgia. So we have an obligation to step up every time there's an obstacle, to remove it and to make sure that our democracy is able to function as it should. So thank you so much again for this lawsuit. I am so proud of everybody who is standing up for the voters because they need to have the access to the ballot box.
Okay, we have literally 2 minutes left. So I just want to thank everyone who's participated, all the plaintiffs and the amazing legal team on this. It's an unbelievable effort, plus the extraordinary, and they're working pro bono. Thank you, really in the public interest. And pro bono is John Lenzer, who has headed the technical team. So I got to tell you, if you want the suit, go to gregpalast.com, contact me. I hope that our communications people will put up an address that you can get a hold of us. Otherwise, go to leni@gregpalast.com, leni@gregpalast.com if you have press requests. But the best would be if we have one of our communications people at PMK and at Julia Brown. Please put in the chat box an email address where you can be contacted if the press has follow-up questions, requests, or appearance requests. Thank you very much.